I live on a busy street. There's a large school about halfway up, and at the bottom is a crossroad with a shop. It's not a main road exactly, it's much too narrow for that, but it is a noisy one. I used to live right next to London's South Circular, a major road linking Woolwich in the east with Chiswick Flyover in the west, so I'm accustomed to living beside traffic. It was only recently, however, for the first time since the lockdowns, that I realised how insidious proximity to traffic is. My road has been closed off for maintenance works for about 2 weeks now. This might be expected to be even noisier than the usual stream of cars, except that, typically for modern Britain, the maintenance appears to have stalled, leaving only traffic cones, the flutter of high-vis tape, and a peculiarly lifeless digger, like something from an abandoned film set. Now my house is ghostly quiet, and it's as though my soul has let out a much-needed sigh of relief. This and several other changes seem almost to have conspired of late to render my life altogether calmer. A freshly assumed sport, boxing, with its de-stressing effects, a cutback on coffee and alcohol, some small measure of financial security, aided by you, my lovely subscribers, and the blessings of friendships old and new. After years of turmoil, contentment has sidled furtively into my presence, and all it took was the sudden withdrawal of traffic to make itself known. And this got me thinking about the sorts of conditions imposed on us by the modern world, conditions few of us would ever choose for ourselves. Cars, after all, embody the furious getting and spending of our culture. I dare say most of us now live in close proximity to their relentless, foul-smelling din. Once subdued streets are choked with them. Their sheer proliferation has begun to undermine the very freedom they are said to symbolize. Behind this roar of traffic is a deep peace, a paradise lost, which we yearn for but cannot obtain. This is most tragic in places that ought by rights to harbour nothing but the sound of wind and birdsong, but which hum constantly with the sound of a motorway, perhaps over a mile away. Even in my fairly rural area, I've walked for miles down deep lanes and tangled canals, just to escape the sound of traffic, and even if I succeed, it doesn't take long for an aeroplane to prick the bubble of my sylvan illusion. The car, then, is the very archetype of global liberalism. Like the crocodile, which evolution has left more or less untouched for 200 million years, the basic premise of the car has proved remarkably resilient in the face of rapid technological progress, its only alteration the replacement of the internal combustion engine with batteries. The car mirrors global liberalism both politically and economically. It mirrors it politically in that drivers are, in this scenario, the mass-enfranchised voter, all contending on a level playing field. There are no first- or second-class motorways. And it mirrors economically in that, unlike the train with its stops and stations, the car travels like liquid over borderless highways. The car is free trade, the train being, I suppose, corn laws and protectionism. But it also mirrors it psychologically in that car drivers are prone, for good reason, to anger. The 1993 film Falling Down, in which Michael Douglas's character effectively goes postal against all of society, begins in a traffic jam. The fly that buzzes around him, ratcheting his anger, is almost a symbol of modern life itself, in which peace and quiet is more elusive than the Holy Grail. And this was filmed before the advent of smartphones and social media. The modern world, from cars to capitalism, the pill to politics, makes us mad. I'm reminded of another film. It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, 1963, also kicks off with cars, specifically a wacky racist-style car chase that barely lets up over the course of 3.5 hours. They are in pursuit of money, making it, to my mind, one of the most psychologically astute satires in film history. But unlike simple slapstick, satire has darker undertones. It's easy to lampoon the dementing effects of a traffic jam, harder to confront the mental health crisis permeating every aspect of our culture. In 1992, the clinical psychologist Louis Sass published his book Madness and Modernism, Insanity in the Light of Modern Art, Literature and Thought. His thesis was that every phenomenon described by people with schizophrenia bore a close resemblance to phenomena not just found in, but at the core of modernism. A surprisingly large number of people who rose to prominence in the worlds of literature, art, music, and philosophy during this period were on the schizo-autistic spectrum. And insofar as modernism paved the way for postmodernism, which dominates our cultural assumptions and institutions today, we can be said to be trapped in a paradigm characterized by insanity. Some of the symptoms of autism and schizophrenia, which share a genetic basis, are impaired empathy, fragmentation of bodily awareness, delusional thinking, and difficulty understanding the metaphorical as opposed to the literal. These neatly correspond to a host of phenomena, none of them ever far away from the news cycle. Impaired empathy is on full display when race hucksters refer to white people with thinly veiled genocidal intent, or when, to take an example from Britain, vandals mocked the young men who turned up to clean. Fragmentation of bodily awareness typifies the explosion of radical gender ideology, as does delusional thinking. Literal-mindedness is the default setting of social media and political discussion, where nuance and subtlety go to die. As for politics itself, research suggests that those on the left are disproportionately neurotic, narcissistic, paranoid, and, despite the image they like to give, unempathetic. That the left can get nasty is one of the more glaring observations of our time. In short, our whole culture is permeated by behaviours not in the strict sense sane, and while we needn't actually have autism and schizophrenia en masse, rates of both have increased massively in the Western world over the last few decades. The point is that the habits and behaviours engendered by these conditions have come to typify the culture at large. It's a kind of pathological left hemisphere thinking, the brain's left hemisphere being famously terrible at understanding the whole as opposed to the parts, the implicit as opposed to the explicit, and the meaning as opposed to the function. Think Spock, but without the countervailing humanity of Kirk. We are then, as Chaplin's great dictator said, machine men with machine minds. Our greatest intellectuals are deracinated materialists with an iron belief in the naivetes of global liberalism. Globalism is like one of those giant AI-generated skeletons bestriding the land, or like No-Face from Spirited Away, its hunger never sated, while we, the little ones, the rationally digestible integers in the beast's spreadsheeted brain, take cover and await the inevitable downfall. Though few would articulate it in this way, I suspect that what we're really waiting for is a sort of tacit admission that the Enlightenment was a mistake, that material comfort does not depend on scientific rationalism on steroids, that the fruits of science do not require a metaphysically deracinated view of the cosmos, shorn of God, the sacred, mysteries and miracles, that capitalism, and a choice between 15 different shampoos, is not the summum bonum of human endeavour. The Enlightenment, for so long associated with reason and reasonableness, turns out to be thoroughly dementing. It was an experiment. What would humans do if their gods were economists and psychiatrists? We turn Jews into numbers and babies into products. Now our shampoos are outnumbered by our antidepressants, which were prescribed to some 56 million Brits last year. This is totally incompatible with the notion that science and reason have given us the best societies in human history. It is rather the case that we are all living in vast lunatic asylums. Modernity has made us mad. Cheek by jowl urban living, which includes traffic, increases the rates of violence and antisocial behaviour. Ugly architecture plays a part in this, but beautiful architecture is unlikely to present itself as a solution to any bureaucracy blind to beauty, for beauty cannot be quantified in Microsoft Excel. There's an element of gaslighting here too. Even as society becomes faster, louder, dirtier, more vapid, more exhausting, and altogether more sordid, the official narrative remains that we are on the cusp of utopia, of a world in which food shortages are solved with bugs, housing shortages with pods, democracy with AI, labour shortages with low-skilled immigrants moving seamlessly across theoretical borders, and mental illness with wonder drugs. Indeed, the elite peddlers of this narrative must always be confecting new crises to up the ante, whether that be climate change or suspiciously timed and certainly lucrative foreign wars. However, they must sense that the veneer is peeling off, especially now that Elon Musk has essentially re-platformed a catalogue of globalism's most outspoken and implacable enemies on the so-called dissident right. The tide is turning, but as it recedes, it reveals a shoreline marred by scum. The hard part is living in this culture while striving to remain sane. This is why, speaking for myself, I've tried hard this year to cultivate, for lack of a better phrase, as uncontemporary a life as possible. To what Tolkien called the prison of materialism, I can answer with the full-throated supernaturalism of my Christian faith, which has at least the merit of antiquity, instead of the vice of contemporaneity. To the madness of social media, I can respond by switching my phone off. And to the annual Christmas frenzy of shopping for landfill detritus, I can reflect on the fact that, actually, I have everything I need right here in the novel peace of my living room.